The woman with the blood issue is one of the more well-known accounts of healing mentioned in the scriptures. Thousands of sermons, probably more, have been preached on it over the years, and many of those have been from the perspective of man-centered works and efforts. They say you need to sacrifice everything. You need to press in through the crowd to receive your healing. You need to go beyond. You need to keep on pushing to touch Jesus. However, what I want to share with you today is a different perspective on the entire thing. A perspective not focused on ourselves or our works or our efforts, but one focused on the love and the mercy of Jesus Christ. As I meditated on this, some amazing things came to light that I'm excited to share with you today. Welcome to Thriving Branch. I'm Jim. Today we are talking about healing, and not just healing, but a specific account of healing that's mentioned in the scriptures. It's the woman with the blood issue, because there's actually a lot here for us to see. And many times we miss it because we are so focused on the works mentality that I mentioned in the opening. We often think, see, you have to press through the crowd. You have to do more. You have to really persevere to receive your healing. And while that may sound good, that may sound right, it's putting the focus back on ourselves and what we're doing. So I want to share with you today, as I mentioned, a different perspective. And let's begin today by reading the actual account from Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 34. And if you have a Bible with you today, I'd like you to read this along with me. Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 34. Ready? 1, 2, read. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing better, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, you see the multitude thronging you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him, and told him all the truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace, and be whole of your plague. So right away, in verses 25 and 26, we learn some details about this woman. First, we see that she had suffered with this condition for 12 years. This was not a minor thing. This was a full-fledged condition that was serious. I have had conditions which spanned multiple years. And let me tell you that the longer something persists in your body, the stronger the hopelessness tends to be. You may think that you're standing strong at first, but the longer that it persists, the temptation grows to give in. The temptation gets stronger to feel hopeless. This thing has been with me so long. I've heard people tell me that. They've said, oh, I've suffered with this for so long that I'm used to it. I don't even know what I would do if it wasn't here anymore. People have told me that. And that's actually a dangerous place to be. because you become used to your condition. It becomes normal. It becomes, for lack of a better term, a part of you. And you start to accept it. So that's why this time span, I think, is mentioned. Because this woman, one thing about her is that she has suffered with it for 12 years. This was a long condition. And in fact, those of you who know my testimony, you know that one of my conditions was a blood issue, which lasted multiple years. So I can both identify and sympathize with this woman. And I know from both my own experience and from speaking with others that for every day, for every week, for every month, for every year that something lasts, the temptation, as I said, to give up and give in tends to haunt you. Even good Christian brothers and sisters who stood with you at the start will begin to waver and crack and crumble and say things like, well, you know, maybe it's God's will for this to remain. Or I really don't know if God will heal you. I've heard both of those. I've had both of those said to me. I've talked with others who have heard the exact same things. And for the person suffering with the condition, watching your friends fall away one by one just fuels the temptation even more to roll over and accept the condition as part of your life permanently. So yes, it's very real. And couple that with what we see about this woman's condition in verse 26. We see that this woman suffered many things of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was nothing better, but rather grew worse. This woman was in a really desperate situation. She was in a pitiful state. She had been to the doctors, many of them, in fact, the scripture says. And we see that she suffered many things by them. She didn't just try one treatment and give up. She tried many treatments. She suffered many things of many physicians. And we see that she spent all that she had. So now she's broke. She's poor. She's in poverty. And what good does she have to show for it? Nothing. She didn't get better. In fact, she became even worse. Combined with what we saw earlier, the time span of her condition, and the despair that comes with such a scenario, we have a deeply depressing picture here. There are quite a number of people in this situation today. And I'm here to tell you that there is a way out. It's not drugs. It's not alcohol. It's not suicide. Believe it or not, those are the top three. But there is a better way. Most churches today are afraid to tell you what I'm about to. But it's not my own message. It's not my own opinion which I'm delivering today. This is straight from the scripture. Look at verse 27. When she had heard of Jesus, she came in the press behind and touched his garment. Now, this here is amazing for many reasons. First, we see that she heard of Jesus. And what she heard must have been amazing. What she heard was enough to completely cancel out her despair and cancel out her hopelessness and replace it with genuine hope. Replace it with genuine faith. What she heard was enough to take her eyes off of her situation, to take her eyes off of herself, and cause her to look to the one who could really help her. And also what she heard, as we've studied before, caused her to disregard and break several Levitical laws and push through an entire crowd and touch Jesus' garment. What do you imagine that this woman heard regarding Jesus? Do you think she heard what many churches are saying about Jesus today? Do you think she heard that she had to clean herself up before coming to Jesus? Or perhaps, do you think she heard that you must earn your blessings from Jesus? Or that God helps those who help themselves? Maybe she heard, as some preach today, that God doesn't heal at all. Do you think she heard any of those things? No. My friend, if this woman heard any of those, she would still not have any hope. Because as we've already read, she had no way to clean herself up or to help herself. She went to the doctors. She spent everything she had. She was completely bankrupt in every sense of the word. This woman heard something else. And in verse 28, we get a clue as to what she heard. We get a clue as to what was going through her mind and what she believed about Jesus. For she said in verse 28, "If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole." Her statement here is very enlightening. This is not a maybe in her mind. This is not a gamble or a roll of the dice from her perspective. This is the language of certainty. She truly knew that if she would touch Jesus' clothes, she would be made whole. And as we saw, she believed it enough to push through the crowd, breaking Levitical laws to do it. This woman heard of Jesus, not in a frightening, fearful, or distant way. She didn't hear about a Jesus who was unapproachable. She didn't hear about a Jesus who was a hard and an angry judge, but she heard of a Jesus that was a healer. She latched on to a promise of God that many of us have forgotten today. It's found in Malachi chapter 4, verse 2, in which it says that the Son of Righteousness would rise with healing in his wings. And the Hebrew word for wings used there is in reference to the corner of a garment or a shirt corner. That's what the word translated as wings means there. It's the corner of a garment. This woman grabbed hold of this promise, the prophecy from Malachi chapter 4, verse 2, and truly believed it. Now what follows in the next few verses from our text in Mark chapter 5 is extremely interesting as well. We see in verse 29 that straightway, immediately, her bleeding was stopped. There are some today who believe that Jesus will never heal instantly, that it's always a long, drawn-out, slow, and gradual process. However, that is not consistent with the scripture or the many accounts of Jesus' healing. We also see that she felt in her body that she was healed. This was not just a spiritual healing, as some try to claim it to be, but this was a very physical healing of her physical condition. Some people try to spiritualize all of the healings in the scripture. And in doing so, they rob hope from people regarding the physical aspect of Jesus' healing as well. Jesus has made provision for complete healing. That is spirit, soul, and yes, your body as well. There's no reason to rob from one to enhance the other. Now take a look at verse 30. Jesus notices that power had gone out of him into this woman. He stops and he asks a very intriguing question that a lot of people just skim over. Jesus says, "Who touched my clothes?" This question is awesome. I love this question because it highlights something specific. There's a reason this question is here. Remember that there are no insignificant details recorded in the Bible, and specifically the words of Jesus himself. In verse 31, the disciples respond to Jesus' question by saying, "There's an entire multitude thronging you. What kind of question is, 'Who touched me?'" Exactly. That's the point. You see, there may have been an entire multitude thronging Jesus. There may have been an entire crowd of people grasping at him, brushing up against him, touching him the way that people swarm all over celebrities and rock stars today. But Jesus only acknowledges this one woman as being one who touched him. What's so special about this one woman? Well, look at verse 31. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace and be whole of your plague." Now, we've studied this before, and we've totally picked it apart. For today, however, I want you to focus in deep on just one point. That is, your faith has made you well. When I asked the Lord about what was special about this woman, why she was the only one that was acknowledged as touching Jesus, I got a reply. And this is what the reply that the Spirit said to me. She touched with intent. This woman touched Jesus with purpose and with a clear goal. Do you understand the difference? The multitude was thronging Jesus just because he was the celebrity of that day. But this woman touched because he was the healer. And she had the intention of being healed. She had a problem. Jesus was the solution. Are you listening? Perhaps today you're in the same situation. Perhaps you even need a healing in your body, much like this woman. And you may be thinking that this is simply too good to be true. Maybe this amazing healing was only for this one woman that Jesus addressed as a daughter. Maybe she was just a special recipient for that time to demonstrate that Jesus was God. Maybe you've been told that before. But in closing today, let's turn over to Matthew chapter 14 and read verses 34 through 36. Let me show you something that will eliminate those doubts for you. Matthew chapter 14, verses 34 through 36. Let's read this together. Ready? 1, 2, read. And when they were gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place had knowledge of him, they sent out into all that country round about, and brought to him all that were diseased, and sought him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched were made perfectly whole. The people of Gennesaret heard what happened with this woman, and like her, with the same faith, they had the same knowledge of him that this woman had. They did not let doubt or fear dissuade them. They sought to touch Jesus in the exact same way as the woman. And take a look at the end of verse 36. As many as touched Jesus were made perfectly whole. How many? As many as touched. So let this sink in. This healing was not just for one woman. Jesus is the same healer today as he was back then. And his healing is not just for the elite. His power is not just for the privileged few. His grace is for all who will just reach out and receive. Let him heal your issue today, whether it be your spirit, your soul, or your body. Whatever it is, he's still here. He's still the healer. His grace is beyond your imagination. Be blessed.